During the COVID-19 crisis, it has been possible to watch any number of webinars with bright ideas as to what should be done to reduce carbon emissions in Europe, but not a single one has looked at what the continent has actually achieved over recent years as a plausible benchmark for the period out to 2030. Therefore, today I want to offer you something different, an insight into how emissions have been reduced over recent years, including examples of best practice from particular countries. We shall see the respective contributions from renewables, demand reduction and fuel switching, and will then be in a good position to determine what needs to be done to meet the current -40% target or the EU President's much more ambitious aspirations for -55%. The current target requires a 20% reduction from the 1990 benchmark in just one decade, as compared to the same level of reduction over 3 decades required in the period to 2020. And this without the advantages of closing any more highly polluting smokestack factories in Eastern Europe or capturing the low-hanging fruit, quick wins with energy efficiency measures and the most attractive sites for greenfield renewables projects. The basis for this video are the key findings of a study which the Centre for Environmental Management, Resources and Energy at the German Ruhr University in Bochum has just published. First, the headline results. Europe is not currently on track to meet the -40% target. It would have to increase its average annual effort on renewables growth and energy efficiency by 20% compared to what was actually achieved between 2005 and 2018. To meet a -55% target would require an exact doubling of these efforts. The need to ramp up effort by only 20% to reach the current 2030 target may not seem an insuperable challenge, but let me show you an important piece of information which surprised even the European Commission when I discussed it with them. The most important means of reducing emissions has been and will remain renewables power. But as seen in Figure 1, annual growth rates on renewables power have been on a downward path since 2012. Incentives and profit margins for renewables development were originally much higher than today, so the build-out rate has slowed down. Offshore wind is doing well, but is offset by disappointing growth rates for other types of renewables. The outlook is then made more challenging by 2 other factors. Some 50% more nuclear power is due to be closed over the coming decade than since 2005. So new renewables must first compensate for this before there's any net contribution to either more power availability or lower emissions. Then in addition, new projects must also compensate for closures of first-generation renewables plants built up to 2005. The second important lever to reduce emissions is energy efficiency. The raw data only shows whether or not demand is decreasing in total and in individual sectors. Our study has split changes in energy demand into those first driven by GDP growth, second, the offsetting effect of global warming, which reduces the need for heating in buildings, and lastly, the real contribution of energy efficiency measures and other factors. Figure 2 shows the results. The simple message is that there is real progress with efficiency, but it is not yet sufficient to counterbalance the GDP-driven growth. Demand reduction in industry is partly explained by deindustrialization, implying carbon leakage to Europe's trading partners. Global warming is reducing the heating demand and helping to slow down energy demand in buildings and therefore also in the power sector. After the headline messages on renewables and efficiency, I would like to complete the picture by showing you how emissions reduction from 2005 was actually achieved. Figure 3 shows the dominant role of renewables, which was responsible for 72% of the gross emissions reductions. But of this, 18% was offset by nuclear plant closures. Fuel switching in the transformation and final demand sectors accounted for nearly 30%, with a balance realised through reduced demand. Figure 4 shows that around half the reduction achieved since 2005 was from hard coal generation, and also that the final demand sector now accounts for 2/3 of all remaining emissions. This is where the real assault is required in the future. The approach to decarbonisation and success which different countries have had is seen in Figure 5. Belgium, the UK and Denmark have achieved the most, with reductions in the range of 25 to 28%. The UK, with its aggressive renewables policy, strong effort in the building sector to replace old boilers with highly efficient condensing boilers, and its coal closures, helped by its own national carbon price, has all worked well. Sweden has been particularly successful reducing emissions in the transport and end-use sector, helped by its high carbon price. Despite Germany's widely trumpeted Energiewende, intended to be a blueprint for the whole world, it has been one of the least successful countries. We now have a good insight into what was achieved over something more than a decade, which included the global financial crisis, and this sets a plausible benchmark regarding what may be realistically possible by 2030. 4 cases were considered, starting with business as usual, then adding in an emissions dividend for the COVID-19 crisis. The 3rd and 4th cases showed what effort would be needed to meet respectively the -40% and -55% targets. Figure 6 indicates potential route by energy sector, and we see that compared to the previous period, the power sector will not play such a strong role. Transport is very much the key, as the replacement of petrol or diesel vehicles by electric equivalents leads to a 3-fold efficiency gain. Provided the marginal source of electricity is zero carbon, there is a very substantial emission reduction per vehicle. Heat pumps, powered by clean electricity in the building sector, also lead to substantial emission savings. However, to realise the full benefit of electrification, it is essential that marginal power is indeed clean and is neither generated from coal nor from gas. Firstly, this underlines the absolute imperative of reversing the downward trend in renewables build. Figure 7 shows a plausible growth path as compared to the past period. The rate would have to double to meet the -55% target. But secondly, it is important that the emissions trading system continues to act as a tight corset on emissions, so that increased power demand for electrification does not lead to higher emissions from fossil fuels. Regarding energy policy and priorities, we need to be careful in overplaying the role of hydrogen, as seen in Figure 8. It is certainly the only way to decarbonise industry, but 1 unit of renewables power used to produce hydrogen saves only around 1/3 of the emissions levels as compared to its use for replacing coal-fired plant, in electric cars or in heat pumps. Europe does need to prepare a hydrogen strategy long term, but even with a doubling of the renewables power growth rates, there will only be a small quantity available for this energy form by 2030. Let me conclude with just 3 simple recommendations for the new German presidency of the European Council. 1. Do everything possible to accelerate the growth rates of renewables power. Ensure that developers will earn adequate profit margins and do not push competition to the limits. 2. Ensure that the emissions trading system keeps a tight grip on emissions so that electrification takes place with clean electricity rather than fossil fuel-based power. 3. Redouble energy efficiency measures to achieve the necessary decoupling of energy demand from economic growth, which has so far eluded the continent. Learn from Sweden's example, proving that a high carbon tax on the end-use sector is effective in reducing demand, and from Italy and Spain in respect of reducing demand in the transport sector. Thank you for listening. I hope that these insights will help you contribute constructively to the continuing progress with Europe's fight to reduce emissions.